My fellow humans and fellow Americans, remember, if you're watching this, you really won't understand this one unless you've seen the previous one, which is a scientific explanation of God, number 1. This is number 2, so you have to see that one. Okay, I promised you I'd start correlating my theory into the Bible, with respect to the Bible, Old and New Testaments. The first one I'm going to take is kind of interesting. Most of you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, and those of you who don't, find a Christian or Jew, they'll tell you about it. And, the description afterwards that occurs, that their eyes and tongues melt out, only can be done during a nuclear blast, by the way. Ask any scientist. Now, how could a man or woman writing, men only wrote back then, know of a nuclear blast? Something to think about, isn't it? The only way they could have known is they were inspired by some force that was omnipotent and knew about everything. And even turning to a pillar of salt, by the way, that's what happens when you're too close to a nuclear blast. Everything melts down, and you go back to your basic elements first, and then those are destroyed too. But in the interim, they do. They go down, and your basic elements is salt, and then it carbonizes. Okay, go back to the creation story. In the beginning, it says there was void. In the Hebrew Bible, it says there was void, or the Old Testament. There's some different versions in Christian versions, but in the Hebrew, it says there was a void. In fact, it says there was chaos. Interesting analogy. How could a writer more than 4,000 years ago equate to my combination of 3 theories about the existence of God? There was chaos, and all of a sudden there was light. Interesting, isn't it? Think about it. Every sentence in the Bible, I pick it up all the time and correlate to this theory. And it correlates sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but it correlates. There was light. Yehi or is the Hebrew for it, which means there was light. The Big Bang. Interesting, isn't it? Okay. I really want your pastor and minister or rabbi to do this, but I'm just giving you a basis of how you can do it yourself. But they have a better cognizance of the Bible and how it correlates to evolution and humanity. But I'm going to give you some other things for you. Maybe you can ask them about this. Okay, free will. The concept of free will is throughout the Bible. Think about that. In this form, this benevolent creating force, during this Big Bang, all these energy, creative force. To be creative, you have to have free will. Think about that concept. The whole concept of the Old Testament, it was historical, but it was also pedagogical. Think about that. Here, this wonderful force created in perpetuation of life, and that's what it was trying to do. The whole Bible, in fact, is perpetuation of life and evolution. And the Old Testament was a different form. Well, people weren't as evolved back then. Of course, you had a more warlike type society. But it was still based on a perpetuation of life. Moses taking the Jews out of Egypt, which is a historically true story, by the way. It can be historically proven in many ways. So it follows along with my creation or my story of God, my scientific version of God. The New Testament certainly does too. It brings a new level that here's this man who said he was God, as probably we are all parts of God. But he was transcendent. He did things in a different way. Instead of war, he took away the sins so that mankind could really be free from sins and yet evolve in a benevolent way, in a loving and compassionate way. Correlates again. Mankind was developing, so this creative force wanted to make it live longer and prosper better. And the story of Moses, I mentioned it before, but it really follows along with this creative perpetuation of life. The Jews were living under tyranny of a tyranny nation like America is, and I'm not suggesting you leave America. I'm just suggesting you change America in a benevolent way. But it's a similar analogy. The Egyptian ruler, Pharaoh, was very evil. He enslaved these people. By the way, he didn't enslave them all the time. Probably historiographically enslaved them for parts of their lives, and then he would have them work for, say, 3 years in slavery, then let them go back to their farms. Because Hebrews, the ancient word is iparu, and they think it was pronounced iparu then, but it's been changed to Hebrew. And what it meant was they were revolters. It meant people that revolted, and they were probably farmers and merchants, mostly farmers, and that revolted against taking all the taxes and taking all the freedoms away. It's a very, very similar analogy to what's occurring in America right now, by the way. And Moses took them out. And he took them out. You know, you remember read in the Bible, if you haven't read it recently, Moses never claims to have a power himself. Not at all. He has a cognizance of God. He has a presence of God in him. And when he performs miracles, he doesn't perform any miracles. Not at all. He uses his staff, and God performs the miracles. And if you correlate that again to, if this creator, it has all this force of life perpetuating force, can create the laws of physics and the laws of nature, he certainly can, he could, absolve them, or he could temporarily sustain them, is what he's done in the story of Moses, by the way. Okay, another important thing to realize is, the concept of the covenant is both in the Old and New Testament. It's real strong in the Old Testament, and it's really strong in the New Testament too. Think about that. If there's a covenant with this creator, and this creator is substantially for the perpetuation of life, for life, you have a covenant with him, then you are for the same thing. That's how you're in God's image. That, and that you're a creative individual. You're in God's image. Now Christ, this is not going to be real plausible with Jews, but if you think about Christ, it's really intriguing, and you correlate it to my theory. Here, mankind had developed so much, or so little, that God created by controlling the laws of physics. He probably did it through means that we can't even comprehend. But a man-like creature that really was synonymous with God. And this was a way for humankind to relate. Like this story that I've told you is my theory. It's hard to relate to. In fact, I had a long time before I related. It came to me in pieces over years and years and years of studying and assimilating knowledge. I hope that you can, but maybe by having your ministers, priests, and rabbis correlate to the Bible how this is true. And some of you are intellectual enough, you can do enough reading and see that this is true. This is really, it became obvious to me about 5 years ago, but it took 40 years of growth to understand this theory. So I hope you can get it. By the way, I postulated the string theory in 1972. Science did it in about 1989. A mathematician, Roger Penrose, really first showed the formulas. By the way, all these theories that are accepted can be mathematically proven with equations. And an interesting note that I didn't tell you about before, and if you read about it, you'll be intrigued with it. The formulas to prove the string theory have been worked out from Roger Penrose on to about the year 2000. That's when everybody started accepting it. And the scientists that don't accept it, it's very interesting. It's because the math comes up with 10 new dimensions. 10 new dimensions. Now this occurs, it's very hard for me to explain it to you, but I remember you probably took algebra and you multiply two unknowns, you get a J factor. Some people used to call it I factor. It's an unknown. It's an unknown entity. And that's the same thing when they run this math out. Certain equations within the formula that proves the existence of the string theory, it comes up with unknowns. And they've run it out so far now that there's, the last I read, which is maybe 6 months ago, they have 10 new dimensions. That's an interesting concept too, by the way, that correlates to the Bible and questions, and people question the Bible, and it all can be explained by other dimensions of life. Even the hereafter, for example, can be explained by another dimension of life. Interesting, isn't it? Everything in the Bible, and if you have somebody who's very familiar with the Bible and has a scientific knowledge or hears this video, can be correlated to this theory of who God is, who is the all-powerful God. It's all in there, and it can be correlated, and if it is, and this is spread, believe me, the world will change, because the concept of everything changes when you start believing in God, and those who believe know this. So this may be a new means for people who don't believe to believe scientifically in God, and then they hopefully will come over to Christianity and Judaism, and a new world will evolve. It'll be slow, but it will evolve. So please spread it as fast as you can and as hard as you can with as much dedication as you can. Thanks.